Welcome everybody, hi, and welcome to the sixth in our series of commentaries on the pandemic and the crisis, in which we're intending to bring insight into the way businesses are changing, the stages of the crisis and the change, and how we can recognize these stages and actually react to them in a positive way as HR and finance professionals. So it's kind of what signs are we looking for, and how we should be reacting and working with them to give a positive impact to our businesses, etc. So today we're going to be focusing more on the second stage of the crisis. The early webinars we did focus very much on the chaotic first stages of the crisis and kind of trying to pick up the pieces from a really traumatic change. But today we're going to be focusing more on the second stage, as many businesses move into a replanning, rethinking and reframing stage of the crisis. And so we'll be talking a bit on that. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Janet Thomas and David Wiliams, who are joining us today. Janet was the head of women in banking until recently and has a long and illustrious career in financial services. So welcome, Janet. Thank you for joining us today.
And thank you, Tom. Thank you for inviting me.
And David is the senior partner at Camp Little, the lawyers and technology lawyers. And so he's going to be giving us and he's joined us before at the very early stages and is now joining us again with insights from his perspective and his conversation with his clients and colleagues. So welcome, David.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me.
So while we wait for everyone to join, because some people join a bit later, I was just wondering if it would be worth us asking, what are your observations? What's the thing which is stuck in the mind from this week of the crisis? So Janet, I was wondering, what's the thing which is sticking in your mind from this week?
Well, Tom, I was woken up at, I think, 4:45 one morning to the chirping of birds.
And you're a London resident, aren't you?
And I live in central London. That's never ever happened before. And I just think that there are some positives coming out of this crisis. And it was lovely. It was lovely. And also seeing the sky looking so blue. So that's the thing that stuck most in my mind this week, is it the birds went off for my alarm.
As Londoners, it feels like we're kind of back in the 18th century, weather and pollution-wise. Incredible. David, what are your thoughts? What's stuck in your mind?
Well, picking up on that theme, something we're dealing with at home is our dog won't go for any more walks. So he's had enough of lockdown. He's saying it's time to go back. Please don't walk me anymore. So we get nothing.
We know we're in our bad.
We've got to.
We know we're in a bad place when our pets are sick of us hanging around at home. Great. So welcome everybody. And what I'd like to do is firstly acknowledge and thank you all for attending. I want to acknowledge the diversity of the people who are attending. So we've got everyone from business leaders and directors of companies who are setting the agenda in their organizations, program directors, HR leaders, etc., who are bringing change to their organizations and really in the thick of it at the moment. And then we have colleagues who are team members and operations team members who are joining us as well. So we've got a wide diversity of attendees today, and I'd like to thank you all for coming. And we're going to be trying to draw lessons for each of our different roles. So whatever our role is, hopefully this will be useful in understanding the position of other people and understanding from our experts what their views are. So we'll be taking questions throughout the webinar. So please type your questions in the box, which I think is on the right-hand side of your screen, although I guess it depends how you've configured it. So somewhere there should be a box which allows you to type in questions. And then towards the end of the webinar, we'll be discussing those questions and answering them. So please just type them in as we go. So today we're planning to complete three things. Firstly, it's to continue our anatomy of the crisis to try and identify the stages and sub-stages which all businesses are going through and which is common to crises, although of course this one is so much fundamentally, is so fundamentally different, both in its scale and also its the lack of a clear end point, which is, it makes it quite different from others. But nonetheless, we're going to try and anatomize those stages. We're going to focus on practical example of businesses in the midst of the crisis, and so really be drawing on the many conversations which our experts and ourselves have been having with businesses, etc., to try and draw lessons from those, and then draw lessons from those experiences to better equip ourselves to understand those stages, and then what we should expect and the best ways we can act and support during this period. So first to note what we're covering and what we're not covering. So what we're covering is the business psychology of this and the business changes and what those stages are, rather than the personal impact. We're not really qualified for to look at the psychology of the personal impact, and there are many other webinars which are covering that area. What we're going to be focusing on are the stages which businesses are going through and the lessons which we need to understand from those. So a few words about brand performance. I'm a founding director of Brand Performance. We're an HR and finance transformation consultancy, and we support businesses in, and often very large businesses in their transformation journey. And so, it's really important for us to be supporting all of our clients and customers and all our colleagues and networks during this period in what you could call a bit of enforced transformation. So that's who I am. And so then to start, and I'm going to start with just talking about the pandemic. I mean, the fact is, and we all know this now, is that this pandemic, make no mistake, is the largest health crisis any of us have seen in our lifetimes, and is also the largest business crisis. And so understanding its anatomy and how it's going to work and putting our experiences in context is more important than ever. This crisis and all crises follow three key stages in our view. The first stage is a kind of chaotic and reactive stage, and we've largely started to pass through that. We're all used to that now, and we've all had to cope with very significant change. The second stage, which increasingly our businesses are working on, is the replanning stage, in which we are reframing what our businesses need to do and starting thinking about both the return to work and also the longer term future for our businesses and how they're going to change. And then finally, at some point in the future, we are going to move on to the new reality stage, which is where we're actually trading again, working pretty much as we did in the past, but dealing with new economic realities and new business environments. So I'm going to start off with a little bit on stage one, the reactive stage. So during this stage, we've all experienced a series of temporary decisions that may or may not have proved correct. So decisions were taken which were on the fly, really, really rapid, which may or may not have stuck. And we've seen a lot of change in direction and all this kind of thing. And and that is really a nature of the reactive stage. We've also all been involved with significant logistical corrections that have taken a lot of activity to sort out. So this is where setting up our colleagues outside of the office for many of our businesses has been incredibly difficult. Getting in financial services, getting the middle office working actually remotely has been a very significant activity, and many other businesses have found that logistical corrections taken up a lot of time. And then the third element of the reactive stage has really been a series of short-term changes to try and stabilize things and actually keep things going. So the drive to conserve cash, the drive to try and manage the risk in one way or another has been absolutely characteristic of this stage. And what I wanted to do was actually talk to our experts about their, I suppose now, their thoughts, memories, and what's really struck them about the chaotic stage which largely many businesses are now passing through. So, David, can I start with you and ask you, what are your thoughts? Because you joined us right in the midst of the chaotic stage and a few weeks ago, and there must be more to say now.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting describing it as a chaotic stage. The one thing that did struck me was, the nature of the crisis. It's a health pandemic. No one is particularly to blame for this within business. So it was interesting. Although it was chaotic, people were getting on, they were taking decisions. There was an emphasis of safeguarding the business, looking at cash, reducing cost and furloughing staff. And I think a lot of businesses have been through that and put very temporary measures in place. I mean, my analysis of that is some businesses might be hurting themselves on a long-term basis, but I think a lot put themselves into a sort of hiatus stage, which means that the next stage when they have to plan is going to be absolutely critical. And I think we are moving into the planning stage. People are looking ahead. People are, coming up with, some views on how the economy is going to move and impact on their business. So there is a shift. But in terms of the chaotic stage, we've passed through it, and people have mothballed as much as they can. I think the focus now is worrying about the planning and what happens next. And I think that's going to be absolutely critical for businesses forward.
It's very interesting. The pandemic itself kind of turned the taps off, and then we were doing everything to try and protect our structure, our plan. Kind of put the plug in and make everything work such that when the taps come back on again, we're kind of ready. And that was not a small exercise in protecting businesses. It's extraordinary, really. But I think that actually, when the water gets turned off, then actually protecting your home, etc., is a difficult exercise. And I guess that's kind of an analogy for this. Janet, what are your thoughts from that early stage? What's sticking in your mind?
Yeah, I completely agree with David in the sense that business have been, I think they've been able to flex their operations quite in an efficient way to put temporary measures in place. But I like your introduction, because if I take myself back to, I was working, I started my banking career in the late 90s. So I was, unfortunately, I was around when we had 9/11. And I remember the 9/11 crisis where banks and financial service institutions their operations were just brought down, they lost key people. And I think since the 9/11 crisis, which was 2001, I think that the finance industry has really developed a deep level of expertise when it comes to business continuity. And we saw that again in the 2008 crisis, which I was right in the eye of that storm. And for me, what was quite key at that time was, unlike the first crisis that we had with 9/11, I wasn't so close to government, but I could see government, particularly in the US, and the large political institutions, kind of coming together, not in concert so much, but coming together for the first time. What's interesting about this pandemic is that business and government have to work together. And we're going to see that with how the furlough arrangement is going to be, I hope, tapered, so that there isn't so much of a hit to the economy. But the three things that come out of this crisis for me, which I'll touch on a little bit later on, particularly with regards to what David's going to talk about, is the strong need for expertise in logistics and data analysis. Data collection and data analysis is absolutely key. Mm-hmm. And I think that the finance industry have a deep expertise in that area. The application of technology, which is, everybody's aware of that, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the one thing that gets overlooked, and David will probably allude to this in some of his responses, is confidence. And this time, we're not talking about confidence in the business, we're talking about employee confidence in going back into the workplace. That's going to be so key this time round. So those are some of the initial touch points that have really come home to me throughout this crisis.
And that is very interesting, and I'm going to invite you to comment in a second, David. But I think that it is really interesting in that many of the crises, I mean, you know, we're all long enough in the tooth to have lived through several crises now. And other crises, you could kind of see an end point. You could see that, you know, we have this crisis, and when that is fixed, then it will be back to a form of business as usual. It might be changed, but actually we're coming back to the same or the similar point. And I see this one as being quite different because, you know, the prolongation of furlough, etc., means that that colleagues are, you know, it's going to take a long time to see the end of this. We have no answer to the question about protecting people in many retail and other environments yet, which is effective. And I think that's really interesting. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, David, in the context of other crises.
Yeah, I mean, it's just picking up on something Janet said. I think it really chimed with me, which is employee confidence in terms of coming back. And I think that's, you know, it is critical now. People are afraid, and it really is a challenge in terms of businesses. How are they going to deal with that? And I think one thing we do need at the moment is guidance. You know, we're waiting for guidance from the government in terms of how the lockdown is going to be unwound, and businesses need that to start planning. But we also need a little bit more guidance on how staff can come back and how they can be reintegrated into the workforce. You know, we've had the social distancing rules of 2 meters, and there's talk in the press about that being unwound to some degree. But businesses do need certainty because they've got to maintain the trust of the employees. The employees have to come back. They have to deal with their health and safety obligations when they come back to work. And some of these rules will be very difficult to achieve. You know, how do you get into a lift and stay 2 meters apart? How, you know, even in an open plan environment, you know, if someone's walking past your desk, they're likely to breach the two meter rule. So I suspect, you know, there's a few moving parts here. We need, you know, the government to give clarity to businesses on the lockdown, and then the businesses have to play their part in gaining the confidence and making the best of the situation. But it leads us to a fundamental question for me, which is, you know, the new normal might not be so different to what it is at the moment. You know, it may well be that lots of businesses just continue to work remotely, maybe with a limited number in the office, and things are going to change. And that's where Janet's points really chime. You know, it's all going to then be down to the technology and maybe new ways of working. And the businesses are having to plan not just for, you know, an economic crisis and potentially a recession, but also changes to how they work and how their business operates. So this is, I think, a very difficult time for businesses. They've got an awful lot to think about over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so let's come on to that replanning section pretty soon. I've got one more question. I want to pick up on something else, Janet, which you said, which was about the effectiveness of the business continuity plans. As you said, financial services have now been rehearsing, creating, and have a very detailed schedule of continuity plans, which they've been practicing year on year. Do you have any impressions about how well they managed to cope, those continuity plans, with this particular crisis? Were they all effective? Was it just switching them on, or how did all that continuity plan pass the test of the pandemic, in your view?
Okay, well, I just think that financial services or the finance industry has incredible deep expertise in this area. And I think that, including myself, some of the firms where I'm sitting on their boards of subcommittees, and also my friends or my colleagues who are in large financial firms, to a large extent, they've been able to continue their operations both nationally, regionally, and also globally. And I just feel that that is an expertise that is very deep in financial services. And I think the start of that was the 9/11 crisis. I mean, we had business continuity before, but that really shook us to our, to our core. But what I'd like to say about this pandemic crisis is the point that you have made, Tom, and also David has highlighted. This is a health crisis. And for the first time ever, I'm actually seeing that business, to some extent, or the people who do the business, i.e. employees, we are completely reliant on the healthcare system, not only in the UK, but even wherever our employees are as a global entity, being sufficiently robust to give employees the confidence that when they go to work, if anything should happen to them or their loved ones, that they'll be looked after at the point of need. And so I've never seen this before, the bringing of healthcare completely in the hands of, they're almost interlocked. They go together. And but I'm confident that the UK government will bring that level of, the confidence is there, but I think it needs to be heightened. David's right, the plans need to be clear. The UK is an expert in services. Our manufacturing base is not as strong as Germany, if you want a comparison, but we are a very strong leading service-based economy, and we have great ideas. So I'm not too concerned about coming up with a more robust logistic discipline for the country to move forward with. But I do feel that we do need to think differently. And I come back again to the technology is the way forward. We've got to find maybe different, slightly enhanced technological ways of working. And there has got to be a focus on what does confidence mean in the workplace, and unpicking that and make sure there's tangibles to measure that with government.
Yeah, so when I think about that, I kind of think about London as a global centre. And in the past, people have talked about, in particular, London being a global centre because it's seen as a secure environment, it's seen as a safe environment, it's seen as an environment with a legal structure which is clear and understood. And all those things is what's attracted and created it as an environment. That's what brings people from all the way around the world to work in London. And actually, strangely, this pandemic has questioned that level of security. If I was, I was thinking about it from an educational point of view. If I am living in a different part of the world and want to send my son or daughter to university in London, actually, safety and security is, I'm now thinking, is it a safe place? Do they have the kind of rules and structure which I need to feel that my child is going to be safe there? And I guess it's true of the industry as well, that that secondment to London is going to be a harder thing to persuade some people to do. And therefore, that, as you're pointing out, that connection between business and the effectiveness of government and the effectiveness of health and other structures is something we haven't really thought about before. And that I think, Gary, that's such a great insight, the idea that these things are now interconnected in a way they weren't before. Good. Okay, so moving on to the replanning stage of the exercise of the crisis. So the kind of things we've seen in the reactive stage and the chaotic stage are now moving away. So we are seeing less. We're now kind of stabilized in our tax-off position, as you've pointed out, David, and now most businesses are starting to thinking about replanning and relaunching. Last week we had the HRD of Office on this webinar, and they were talking very much about their plans for reopening in a limited way their shops, etc., across Britain. And I think that more and more of our organisations and businesses are now thinking about what that future is going to look like. One of the characteristics which I'm seeing of it is that they're generating two plans. There is the short-term plan, of bringing organizations back and starting them trading again. And then there is a longer term plan, which is what is the size and scale of the new market conditions. So, for example, Sharon at John Lewis has been saying that they are considering whether they are ever going to reopen some of their stores in the new reality, in the new economy, at the same time as working how to open the stores which they are going to reopen. So it seems to me that there's two types of planning going on. One is the practical steps required to reopen and start trading again. And then the second is the adjustment required to allow them to meet the new market conditions. I guess BA and the airlines are kind of case in point here, where at the same time as they're planning, how do we run an airport? How do we run our queuing systems and all that stuff to restart their service? They're also thinking, actually, it's going to be many years until we get the same kind of scale of travel which we saw previously. So that's my thought, that replanning is moving into a kind of two sections area. But I wanted to invite you guys to tell us more about your thoughts. So Janet, can you tell us more about your thoughts on the replanning, what we should be thinking about, and what the characteristics are so far in this emerging stage?
I think that for the replanning stage, David touched on it earlier about working from home, and I'll leave him to kind of talk about the legal aspect of that. But I think that comes with some challenges for families, and I'm sure that many firms will want as many staff in the early stages of this process to work from home where that's possible. And so I think there's going to be a lot more focus on what technology staff can use, measuring productivity. Can people work in different ways for global operations, so on. So I know that some companies, and many of my friends have been working like that for the last 5 or 6 weeks already. But I think one of the biggest talking points that has emerged is about how do you measure productivity and set targets to make sure that the business is not just delivering an interim service, it's actually going to be delivering a great service to clients and reaching a high level of productivity. So those are some of the things that I see. So technology is still at the front of this, and logistics, whilst coming back into the office, I think there are many challenges with regards to making sure that employees feel confident going back into the workplace. What are the policies around hot desking? I think that will probably be removed. The other thing that I think is going to be quite a big issue for firms is that for individuals who do go back into the office, it seems to me that the cleaning the office space or cleaning the office environment now becomes a big issue. And it's about how that's done, how that's seen, how that's communicated to staff to give them a high level of confidence that their well-being is being looked after. So those are some of the things that my friends are talking about, some of the things that I'm hearing of and I'm involved in.
David, what are your thoughts, David? Because
I mean, just tracking back to your points, I think it's right. There are, two thought processes going on. There's the immediate, let's get everyone back to work in the new normal. What does that look like, and how we achieve it? And then the longer term planning. And the longer term planning is interesting for me. We've got the recession, we'll need all the staff. What are we going to do with everyone? Do we need to restructure? But creating quite a lot of new opportunities. There are businesses in trouble. There are, businesses can take advantage of that. There is new ways of working. So, both of those are going on. They're not entirely separate. I can see a world where people are starting to say, we don't need the office space. Maybe we need some meeting rooms. Maybe we need some hubs. Maybe we need people to come together. So I think there is a change. And what I'm seeing is you know, because we're in a sort of technology law firm, we're seeing industries moving. And what I think is happening is that the pace of change because of this pandemic and the economic crisis means that some of this change is going to happen much faster than we possibly expected. And I think in many ways that's going to be a good thing. It's going to be frightening. Change is always frightening for people. But I think, you know, this adversity is going to create opportunity. And it's really interesting, over the last couple of weeks, I've talked to people, and it's been, you know, 2 weeks ago, it was doom and gloom and, you know, my business is in trouble. And I talk to them now and they're like, well, actually, you know, we've kind of done an interactive pub session and we think there is opportunity. We think we can do this. Actually, this is really exciting for us. We can take advantage of this. We can do it in a lower cost way. We can kill the big guys. And I'm starting to see some of that optimism come out. And, you know, people need to build on those plans with some, you know, they need to know what's happening with furlough. They need to know what the government plans are on lockdown and put that into the strategy. And we're not quite ready to do that. But there is optimism out there, you know, during these very tough times. And, you know, it's great to hear. And I think people have used some of this time to think about, you know, what is happening to their business and what's happening in the world, and to bring on new ideas. And it's interesting. I think, you know, it's going to be a real rough patch, but actually I think the time ahead is very exciting for lots of businesses, and they can take advantage of this, and they can learn and be more efficient and effective, and, you know, and you know, move forward.
I'm going to touch on the speed part of what you're describing there, David. I mean, many business leaders are telling me that they've done more changes to their business, the ways of working, etc., in 5 weeks than they've managed in kind of 5 or 10 years. Do you think some of that's going to stick, and that we're going to be seeing businesses being expecting us to behave faster than we used to do, and that being kind of something which sticks out of the pandemic, and something we should react to?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what other people think, but I love some of the stuff. I go to meetings and, you know, management meetings, and I might only have to comment on 20 minutes. You know, I don't understand some aspects of the finances, and I don't think I can comment on them, but other aspects I've got a lot to say. So, you know, I can just listen to some bits of the meeting, maybe do other things when I'm not really needed. I don't have to sit there and nod, and I can be more efficient. I can meet people and have video calls across the world. I don't have to travel to see them. It's the new normal, and that's much more effective. People working from home and not having huge costs of offices in London or wherever else it happens to be, that's going to help businesses. I do genuinely think it's nice to come together with colleagues and have a hub and meet in person, and I do miss that interaction. But I don't think I need that 5 days a week to be successful in what we're doing. So
yes.
Yeah, I think this change it's coming quickly, and it's you know, it's
I think that's really interesting. I mean, you know, in many of our businesses, if I wanted to move my coffee cup from this side of my desk to that side of the desk, I had to go and ask the boss whether that was okay. And that stuff's kind of gone away. People are doing what they need to do autonomously, etc. I wonder, Janet, how much of that you feel is welcome, and how much of that you think you're going to see carrying on? Because I'm seeing this leadership from the bottom. More and more, if there is a dangerous work practice, then anyone has the right to call it out, for example, in a way in which previously people were all kind of waiting for the guidance from the top.
I'm in total agreement with you, both you and David. And just to go one step further, I think that employees are seeing the value of working from home. People are saying to me they're much more productive, they're able to do much more, they've got time to reflect properly on the things that they have to do. And I think the biggest takeaway from me with regards to this crisis is, one, I think there's going to be a massive rethink about our economy for the UK, because we are a service-led economy, and therefore we're not held down by physical structures like an economy like Germany, which is manufacturing based. A lot of people provide services, so we're able to work much more flexibly. So I see a great big rewriting of the business model for the UK. I also feel that businesses are going to have to think about their business model, because I've seen many services, like some of the communication companies that I would normally use, they've had to move all their conferences and any kind of face-to-face meeting that they had in the past online. So what's the new business model for them? So for some business, it's a real rewriting of that business model. And I think it is exciting time. I completely agree with David. I think this is a massive opportunity for us to move ahead to think ahead of this crisis about what do we want our business to look like in this new digital world, and just get on with it. Just plan for it, have the strategy and have the steps to execute that strategy. I think it is an advantage. You're beginning to see the beginnings of that in some of the countries in Southeast Asia, such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand. You're beginning to see them move much more towards a true digital economy, rather than having people in offices and physical structures. And then the other biggest takeaway is, I think that what will the real estate sector commercial real estate sector look like in the UK, particularly London? That will be quite interesting to see what emerges from this technological change that we're just about to embark on.
It's very exciting. I mean, in fact, I'm delighted to say that you have both. And, senior financial services and lawyer talked about the optimism and started talking about optimism. And that's really exciting. And I love the connection between the optimism and now the greater ability to execute, which we're learning in the crisis. So there's this moving faster and our ability to change ourselves. If we can connect this optimism to this confidence, then there's new confidence in our ability to do stuff, then that would be exciting. I do wonder a little bit, one of the things which I've kind of noticed is the kind of moral dimension which is coming in as well. And I'm delighted that, as I said, financial services leader and lawyer, let's focus on the moral dimension for a little bit. Because I'm seeing that a lot of the things which we were planning previously, which we might have seen as luxurious or nice to haves and stuff like that, I think are possibly less acceptable in the future. So for example, for an organization who might have been planning the entire refurbishment of their head office back in a different world of 10 weeks ago, might now be considering escaping those kind of luxury contracts and paring down that because frankly, with members of staff on furlough and stuff like that, it's possibly not acceptable to their staff to be spending millions on doing that at the same time as people being in hardship, really. So I don't know if you guys got any thoughts on that, David. I don't know if you've.
I mean, the one thing that chimes me in, it's also something that came out of the last recession a little bit, but I think how employers deal with their staff morally, it may be that they have to make changes, but it's whether those are done in a consistent and fair way. And I think that this will define employers. And there is there's Glassdoor or, other references, but I think people will be saying, well, what did you do, during the pandemic, and how did you handle your staff, and how were you fair to them, bearing in mind that, it can be very bleak if anyone is going to lose their job. So, I do think it's a really, the morality of this is really interesting because, there's a whole generation that look at, how are you going to look after me and how are you going to make me a better person and how you can be more flexible. And I think employers are going to be judged on this as they go forward. And it's important they don't just think about the here and now. It's, you think about the people you're going to take with you in the longer term and what they're going to be thinking of you. And I think that's a really important thing. We're going to have some really tough times and some really tough decisions to make. And it's how you go about that and how you deal with it and how you maintain confidence of your staff in doing that. And picking up the thing that, what we talked about in terms of change, it's can you take your staff and help change? Can you re-educate them? Can you, take them into new areas and train them and make them better into this new world? Again, the employers that do that will succeed.
Do you think that's right, Janet, or do you think when the birds all go away, the pollution's back, the traffic and noise of the city's back, that we're all going to go back to exactly as we were, or do you think there is going to be a difference?
I do think there will be a difference, because I saw that in 9/11, and also much more in 2008, when I'll call no names, of course, but a few banks wanted to have that a very expensive Christmas party, and they were reminded that working in the city just down the road, there's a lot of poverty, and what came out of that was many of those banks in the Square Mile and also in Canary Wharf did make huge donations to the neighbouring communities, and those communities have benefited from that. Now, what I see from this crisis is that healthcare, or the National Health Service, has become such a big issue. And I think coming out of this crisis, many people will have mental health considerations, and firms might want to use this as an opportunity to combine business and doing good at the same time, and maybe thinking about what kind of investments or support or getting closer to healthcare that they might want to pursue. So I do think that's a great opportunity, because not only will the community or the health service benefit from that, but also will employees benefit from having different types of services. And one thing I just want to highlight, not everyone enjoys working from home. For some people, it's actually quite challenging for lots of different reasons. And employers need to ensure that there's a duty of care to them as well, whilst the people who do enjoy working from home maybe can carry on doing so. So employers do have challenges in terms of walking that fine line and coming up with a balanced policies that's good for the business, but also is good for their employees, who effectively, as we now realise, the employee is your business. And so they've got some challenges in kind of coming up with the right models to keep their business going.
I think that's very interesting, because the flexibility, I mean, if I think about the GP example, so the GP example, they have moved all their consultations online for necessity at this point. However, as you point out, Janet, some people embrace that and would love to schedule a meeting with their doctors and then talk to them online, and will continue to do so, whereas others don't appreciate that and actually want to go and visit and have a face-to-face consultation. And I guess creating that flexibility and allowing both the GPs who are doing the consultation to offer those choices, and at the same time the people who are taking the service, who are receiving the service, also feeling that they have a choice and autonomy in that, is something which is kind of quite new, I think, to many of the services which we've kind of lived and breathed over the last decades. David, do you think this means that we're going to, I mean, I know we did some weird stuff during the reactive and chaotic period. People were furloughing staff when there was no legal definition of what furlough means in UK law, and yet we all did it. And so are you seeing that we're going to have to revisit people's contracts and then look again at them? Are you expecting a wholesale?
Yeah, absolutely. I think many different ways. I think we're going to be changing what they do, because I think businesses are going to be refocusing. I think we're going to be changing how they work. I think it's fine for people to be temporarily working from home, but is this going to be on a longer term basis? Who's going to pay for the kit? What about the health and safety implications of people working from home? Who's doing the risk assessments? So I think there's a lot of aspects that the businesses are going to have to think about. It's fine for a change to happen on a temporary basis, which it has, but on a longer term basis, I think it's going to become much more complex. And this whole thing is throwing up, new issues. I'm talking to people and they've recruited lots of people who they've never met other than seeing them on the screen. They don't necessarily know what they're like in person, and they've not tried them out. So we're all going into new areas. We're all inventing new ways of dealing with things, and businesses will have to keep up and adapt. But I suspect as part of that, we're going to be relying on the workforce to be flexible, to agree to changes. We talked about productivity and setting rules, so I suspect it's going to be a new way of setting targets and managing them, and all that needs to be built into the package. So, there is a lot to be thought about. I suspect some of these things will come down the line. The here and now is probably enough for people to deal with in ending the lockdown and thinking about the future of the business in wider terms. But yes, focusing on these issues is going to be really, really important.
Very, very good. I mean, my thoughts, and I'm going to draw us on to questions in a second, but my thoughts on what you're describing is that this kind of bottom-up leadership that we've all got a contribution to make, followed by the need to start radically thinking about the business shape, means that we've all got a responsibility to start thinking about what that future is, because we've all got a contribution to make to it. So in the retail industry, and we were talking earlier, in most of our businesses, if people see something which is unsafe, they should be doing something about it, rather than calling health and safety, etc. And I think that's really interesting in the sense that I think that, the replanning period is starting now. Now is the time when all businesses are starting to think about it. I think if we expect this to be a top-down process where the business strategy is set and then everybody has to follow that and it's broken down for us, etc., I think that is unlikely to be the case. I think that on this particular case, it's much more likely to be that our own contributions and people on every tier of the business will be contributing to that strategy and ways of working. And I think that's something which we all have a responsibility to start thinking about. So I think it's, it's exciting. So, Becky, you've been monitoring the questions during the webinar. Would you like to tell us what we've got, and then we'll try and discuss and answer some of those questions before we close?
Yeah, hi Tom, hi Janet, hi David. We've talked about the working from home logistics quite a lot, and Nigel asked this question last week actually, and we didn't get around to it. So I just wanted to see if there are any final thoughts on, if the new normal for some people is working from home, do you think companies might pay a working from home allowance, because things like rent and heating, snacks, etc. are going to be transferred from the company to the employee? And also, at one time, self-employed people, I think, had to pay more council tax if a room was dedicated to work. I don't know if that still happens. And then also on the same topic, if there is a large move to work from home and companies need less space, do you think that rent will go down?
Shall I pick up just a couple of those?
Yes, please, David.
In terms of expenses for people working from home, yes. I mean, I expect employers will be bearing the cost of that, and again, this will be built into working arrangements. Whether that will mean that the employee is net better off, I'm not sure, because I think there might be a conversation to be had, which is, the employee is no longer commuting to work or incurring that sort of costs. So there might be a conversation to be had, particularly in tough times, as to whether that's going to be net beneficial. The other thing is there's the tax implications. There's various ways of reclaiming the tax and making that efficient. In terms of the rent, I can see a place where more people are working from home. Offices are more about hub areas or somewhere to meet clients if you need to do that in person, and perhaps less about day-to-day work. And I think that might be a long-term change, and that might, at least in the short term, change how the real estate in London works. It may be that people are looking for more offices along those lines, and less areas where there's thousands of people in open plan working environments. Of course, on the other side of the coin, people might just forget about what's happened and just go back to how it was. But I don't think that's going to happen. So I suspect there'll be less call for real estate in London, and the nature of that real estate will change because of you know, how the economy is going to move forward.
Becky, any more? Oh, Janet, go.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of David's comments, I think the sector that will probably have experienced the biggest impact or most profound impact will be commercial real estate. Mm-hmm. Because I think the definition of working as we know it today, I'm with David on this. I do think this crisis has started. Look, when we look at the high street, we could see the retail high street changing anyway as more people do their shopping online, they order their food online and so on. So that change was already in process. Now, what we have is COVID has taken people out of offices and put them, they're at home working. And even though 100% won't be at home working, it does set the scene that something is going to happen in terms of the structure of commercial real estate, which will have a profound effect on London. So that'd be quite, and all the other major cities that have significant commercial real estate. So I see that having quite a big effect on central London and other cities as well.
That's it on questions. There's a few that are quite specific that I'll feed to you, Janet, and David afterwards. So so time to wrap up, I think.
Great. I mean, thank you, everybody. Thank you, David and Janet. That was really useful. I've got my overriding observation from today is how optimistic you both are. And, you know, a few weeks ago, none of us felt this way. I think that's really exciting, thinking about the new opportunities which we've got to think about. And that's, you know, that is fascinating. David, I think that on the more technical aspects, you are planning a webinar next week. So yes. Could you tell us about that? Because I think...
Yeah, so Kemp Little we're doing a webinar, I think it's on Thursday. It's part of our People and Pandemic series. And it's on the technical legal aspects of people returning to work. So doing risk assessments, making sure people are safe, what happens if they won't return to work, maybe they're shielding or afraid. So it's looking at those aspects. So you know, feel free to sign up to that if you're interested.
Great, I think that would be really good because I think there's a lot of specific technical things which we need to be thinking about from a legal angle. So I'll be joining you on that. Thank you, David. We're continuing our webinar series. We're doing this one on a weekly basis. We're talking about automation and technology and its role for HR and finance going forward. As Janet was saying, I think that's going to have a larger role than previously we were expecting. So that's quite interesting. And then we're also doing works on reframing of our activities, programs and plans to reduce them and kind of hone them in on what the new future would be. So Janet, thank you very much for joining us today as well. It was great to speak to you, and thank you everybody else for joining us. I hope it was a useful webinar today. So thank you everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Great pleasure.